In the following presentation about how do we learn grammar by Quirk and Stein, I'm going to concentrate only on those sections that are relevant to some of the topics included in Section A of Unit 1 in our syllabus. Before starting, I'd like to state briefly what I consider is the main aim of the article. And this is that there is not only one type of grammar, the grammar we learn at school, but that there's another type of grammar, which is a kind of internalized system of grammatical patterns we are born with. This internalized system is essential for language acquisition. The chapter is organized as follows. There are 6 sections, which I have listed here. However, I would like to tell you that I'm going to develop only the sections that I consider are more relevant to our purpose. In the case of section 5, it's between brackets because I'm going to be dealing with some of the concepts included in this section in the introduction when I speak about the grammar we learn at school and the grammar we acquire. In the case of the use of nonsense and making sense, I'm going to fuse these 2 sections. And finally, I will devote more time to section 6, different language, different grammar. Introduction. The author opens the chapter by analyzing a quotation from a play by Goldsmith. Let schoolmasters puzzle their brain with grammar and nonsense and learning. This quotation suggests that there has always been a tendency to associate the learning of grammar with complex and tedious rules that do not make sense to the native speaker, thus nonsense. The author argues this is so because there was a period when the teaching of Latin was widespread and many of the categories used to describe the grammar of Latin, especially paradigms of inflections, were also used to describe the grammar of English, an isolating language that has very few inflections. The grammar we are taught at school versus the grammar we acquire. The author suggests that people tend to think of grammar only as the grammar taught at school, that is to say, a prescriptive grammar that sets regulations about what is correct or incorrect. However, he goes on to explain that speakers acquire an impressive knowledge of grammar before schooling begins. And this note is added by me, it's not in the chapter. This could be attributed to a kind of internalized system of structural regularities stored in the mind, a universal grammar which is innate. I introduced this concept here because it is a concept that is going to be developed more in depth in the next chapter you have to study by Vivian Cook. Randolph Quirk illustrates this knowledge of grammar with an authentic remark by a 5-year-old, and the remark is the following. Eric and me just bite lots of things. If we analyze this statement using a prescriptive approach, traditional grammar, we will find lots of grammatical mistakes. For example, there's a mistake in agreement, has instead of have. There's a mistake in the past participle form of the verb buy, which is irregular, bought. There are spelling mistakes. However, if we analyze it closely, we will see that there are lots of grammatical features of morphology and syntax that he can master very well. Let's see, what grammar can he master, this boy? He has mastered the ordering of sentence elements. Subject, predicate. Eric and me, this is the subject in front position, and then the predicate. Within the predicate, he has placed the direct object right after the transitive verb and the adverbial of time between the auxiliary verb and the lexical verb. The components of the phrase which operate as the sentence elements have been put in the correct grammatical sequence. What is components of the phrases? For example, if we take the noun phrase lots of things, things would be the head of the noun phrase, pre-modified by the determiner lots of. He has notions of perfect aspect, so he knows he should be using present perfect tense and not simple past tense. He has mastered the inflection of regular verbs. Although this is a gross mistake, apparently, it tells us that this boy, this 5-year-old boy, knows a lot about grammar because he knows that the ed inflection is a signal of past tense, let's say, and he adds it to a lexical verb. But the most important thing the child knows is that utterances will illustrate regular patterns, and that not respecting these patterns, this order of sentence elements or of elements within phrases, will produce ungrammatical utterances nobody will understand. For example, what about ofs, bite, Eric, just, lots, me? Well, that is ungrammatical and he would never produce it. The power of analogy. How has the boy acquired this knowledge? Well, the boy does not know the labels subject, object, adverbial, but he knows that a sentence needs a subject and where to place an object or an adverbial. However, he has succeeded in producing a grammatical sentence. So even though he doesn't know the labels or functions of these grammatical elements, he knows he can make a grammatical sentence. We have no reason to believe that he had heard this particular sentence before, or that somebody has taught it to him and he has repeated it. We assume he generalizes by analogy. He has learned by analogy. What is analogy? A cognitive process involving comparison whereby the information concerning one linguistic element is linked to another element. For example, the fact that he has produced bite instead of bought is a mistake made by analogy because he has heard many verbs ending in ed, and so he decides to link this knowledge and produce that form. The use of nonsense and making sense. In these two sections, the author sets up a very interesting hypothesis as to how we, as speakers of the language, learn the role of what we may later learn to call parts of speech. That is to say, how we learn the role of adjectives, verbs, nouns, and also the role of sentence elements, subjects, objects, adverbials. The author makes use of 5 arrangement of lexical items. Many of them cannot be called sentences. It's like an arrangement of lexical items to illustrate the key role of syntax and correct use of morphology for a sentence to be grammatical and to make sense. Let's see. I'm going to analyze only 4 of the 5 forms he illustrates this topic with. What about the first, let's say, utterance? It sounds English, doesn't it? Why can we say that it sounds or it looks as if it were English? Well, because there are structural words that actually exist in English, like will, which is an auxiliary verb, the definite article the, a preposition, the preposition be. Then at the same time, there are words that sound English-like because of their inflections. For example, the suffixes. Croatation, this suffix suggests this word could be a noun, Anglishably, ly suggests this word could be an adverb. Polanians, the inflectional suffix s suggests it's a noun in the plural. Wrangling looks like a non-finite form of a verb ending in ing. Now, that would be morphology. So the morphology of the words, or through the morphology of the words, we could assume this could be English. But what happens when one tries to read this string of words or lexical items? Let's see. Croatation, Anglishably, Polanians, Plickful, Wrangling, Plum, Rit, Will, The, In, Be, The. As you have seen, it is very difficult for me to read this stretch fluently. Why? What is it that doesn't make sense? It's not only the words, there's something else that doesn't make sense. Let's have a look at number 2 and then we'll go back to number 1. I'm sorry. I'm going to read number 2 now, which contains exactly the same lexical items. But let's see what happens now. Plum the plickful Croatian will be Wrangling Polanians Anglishably in the writ. I think you will agree with me that this sentence is, or this stretch of words, is at once more, it's at once clearer. This arrangement is clear and less nonsensical. But why? The words are still strange. They look like coinages, not real words in English, because the syntax and the morphology of the words used in each position in the sentence now make sense. This string of words, this arrangement, we could say, falls into some sort of pattern. So, plum could be an adverb of time. It could be something like yesterday. The plickful Croatian, that sounds like a noun phrase, which could be the subject of the sentence. And the head would be Croatian, pre-modified by an adjective and by a determiner. We could deduce that plickful is an adjective because of the suffix full. And then we have something that looks like the predicate. Will be Wrangling, Polanians, Anglishably in the writ. Will be Wrangling, this verbal phrase could be the head of this predicate. And we could assume or deduce that it's a transitive verb. Right? Good. So this is a very nice and original example to illustrate the importance of syntax and morphology. That is to say, not any word would fall in any place well. That is to say, Croatian combined with Anglishably, that sounds like an adverb, and then another noun does not make sense. But it does make sense to have something like an adverb or adverbial and then a noun phrase. The plickful Croatian will be Wrangling. Then the order of the auxiliary verbs and the lexical verb, which is non-existent here. So, both syntax and morphology are important. Through morphology, we will know where to place the words in the sentence. When we go to number 3, now this is English. Then the artful delegation will be muddling politician and unpardonably in the street. It is English, but yet it doesn't make sense either. But if we go to number 4, probably the young publisher will be reading manuscripts through in the evening. This makes complete sense. So this is number 3, illustrates the fact that it's not only the syntax and the morphology of words, but the meanings of words that also help to make sense of language. So there's not only grammar among words, but there's grammar and meaning within words. Now we go to the last section, different language, different grammar. And this is a very important section because it deals with ways of expressing meanings through different grammars. And this is what we are going to be doing this year. This year we are going to be analyzing how the same meaning is expressed in the grammar of either English or Spanish. And we are going to compare and contrast that. The fact that English is an isolated language with few inflections does not mean it does not have a grammar. It does, but its grammar is different from the grammar of Latin or of any other language for that matter. Just as the vocabulary of every language is distinct and peculiar, so is the grammar of a language. So it's not only a question of words having different words, it's having different grammar as well. All languages can express exactly the same meanings, but they do so through different grammars. For example, while in Spanish, future time reference can be expressed by means of a verbal inflection, in the case of futuro imperfecto del indicativo, in English there is no such inflection for futurity. That is why we do not speak of a future tense proper in English, but of forms of expressing future time. Let's analyze. In Spanish, we could say something like, saldré, viajaré, trabajaré. If I decided to leave the adverbial out of the sentence, the time reference would be clear anyway, because it's in the inflection of the verb, in the verbal inflection. Saldré means either mañana, el año que viene, más tarde. However, in English, you could say this by saying something like, I'm leaving early tomorrow, or I'm traveling tomorrow or early tomorrow. Now, should I decide to remove the adverbial early tomorrow from the sentence and leave only I'm leaving or I'm traveling, it would not be clear whether this verbal form, the present progressive in this case, has present or future time reference. Let's see some examples the author uses to illustrate this topic. Same meaning, different tenses. Another example. In English, we have three verb tenses, the simple present, the present progressive, and what some grammarians call the emphatic present, which is a variety of the simple present tense. For example, simple present tense, I play, present progressive, I'm playing, I do play, emphatic present. However, in some languages, there is only one single verb form corresponding to those three. For example, French does not possess three separate verb forms, but this does not mean that French cannot express these distinctions in meaning. So, as you can see, the verb in French is travail, and it's the form used in the three cases is identical. Travail, 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 but there are adverbials to show that the time reference is different, or the aspect is different for that matter. In making these distinctions by other means than a verbal inflection, there's no need in French to give three different names to these verbal forms. So in the first case, we are not speaking about simple present tense. In the second case, we are not speaking about present progressive tense. And in the third case, we are not speaking about this emphatic present, because the tense, the verbal form, is exactly the same. So, in making these distinctions by other means than a verbal inflection, that is to say, by using adverbials, there's no need in French to give three different names to these verbal forms. In contrast, in English, the three verb forms need different labels. Same meaning, different moods. In Spanish, we use the pretérito perfecto del modo indicativo to denote past time reference, and the pretérito imperfecto del modo subjuntivo to express hypothetical meanings. For example, ayer visitaste a mamá, pretérito perfecto del modo indicativo, past time reference. Si visitaras a mamá más seguido, sería más feliz. Visitaras, pretérito imperfecto del modo subjuntivo. In contrast, in English, we use the simple past tense indicative mood to denote both past time reference and hypothetical meanings. Exactly the same verbal form. Let's see. You visited mom yesterday. And if you visited mom, forgot to underline it, if you visited mom more often, she'd be happier. As you can see, the same form conveys different meanings. So the fact that Spanish uses a subjunctive verbal form to express a hypothetical meaning does not mean that the past form in English is an instance of subjunctive mood as well. So if you visited mom, we cannot say that this is subjunctive mood because it denotes hypothetical meaning. One thing is meaning, another thing is grammar. Different syntactic functions and different cases. By cases here I mean the famous declensions, Latin declensions. In modern English, the system of declensions is very simple compared to some other languages. There is only one case derived from Latin grammar that really makes sense, the genitive case, in which possession is shown by attaching apostrophe s or only apostrophe to the noun. So, the noun, the common noun girl is in the genitive case in girls. The same goes for the plural common noun boys is in the genitive case in boys, though the pronunciation is the same. However, so this is about genitive case. Genitive case, this grammatical category does make sense in English. However, it makes no sense to classify nouns and or pronouns in English using the Latin labels nominative, accusative, or dative case. Nominative case refers to a noun in the position of a subject. Accusative case refers to a noun or pronoun in the position of direct object, and dative case, noun or pronoun in the position of indirect object. So, in Latin and in German and other languages, the noun takes an inflection to tell us that it's either a direct object or an indirect object. And that noun could be placed in different parts of the sentence. For example, not necessarily after a transitive verb, in the case of accusative case. So, doing so would be, if we decided to use the Latin labels in English, would be to suggest that these labels would have the same application as they have in Latin or in German grammar, and this is not so. In English, therefore, it makes more sense to speak of subject or object case. For example, in the case of pronouns, the subject pronouns I, you, we, the object pronouns me, you, them. To sum up, we should be aware of the difference between standard grammar, prescriptive grammar taught at school, traditional grammar, and grammar as an internalized system we are born with rather than formally taught, universal grammar. We should be aware of the difference between a sentence with grammatical mistakes and a sentence that is ungrammatical. So, he go to school is not an ungrammatical sentence. There's a grammatical mistake from the point of view of prescriptive grammar, which is not having used the third person singular, he goes. It is important to be accurate and rigorous as regards the categories and grammatical labels exclusive of each language and try not to force them in the description of other languages. Well, that's the end of the class. If you need any further explanation on this chapter, please leave your question in our forum. Thank you.